Well, welcome back to Mr. Obsolete's Vintage Homesteading. Today we're going to have two parts, but the first part we're going to be talking about is our Stihl 034 here, Mr. Cheesy, the weird ball chainsaw. So if you haven't seen our channel before, or you missed some of our videos and wonder why I call it that, I'd recommend to go back and watch several of our recent videos and explain all about it. But, well, basically, just to make a short story of it, this saw was sold as a professional grade saw. It's 57cc, and the reason I call it Mr. Cheesy is because the power plant, the engine part of the saw, is pro grade, but the rest of the saw is substandard. The homeowner saw has a lot of cheap features. There again, go back, watch our older videos, and I go over it step by step. But anyway, the other thing on this saw, when I first used it, I had an 18-inch bar on it, and we had taken a great big branch out of a tree that was hanging down on the road and used it for branching and cutting that thing up, and it worked really good. And so the bar that came with this saw was completely destroyed, and so I wanted to buy a new bar. And originally had a 20-inch bar on it, and I thought, well, I like running a 24 on my mid-size saws, so I looked around. I was going to buy a Stihl Roll-O-Matic, which are pretty good bars, but they were just too expensive, and so I found a special deal on this bar here, the Sumura, and it's a 24-inch bar. I paid $30 less than I would have for a Stihl bar, and this is a better quality bar. But anyway, the thing that was surprising about this saw, that it seems like it's got lots of horsepower and has a high chain speed, and I thought, well, that's ought to be a really powerful cutter. And if you're branching and limbing and doing small trees, it is. If you get it out and try to do hard work with it, it doesn't have any torque to speak of. And torque is what does the hard cutting. And so what would happen, I'd be out cutting, and pretty soon this RPM would drop off a little bit, and then pretty soon the chain would stall, and then I'd pick it up, and so I thought, well, gee, I wonder if that'd be a good way to learn how to be a rock star and playing the guitar. Nah. So anyway, I was disappointed in the way that it's such a limited use saw, and I thought, well, since because of the high horsepower and the high chain speed, for branching and limbing and cutting up reasonably small diameter trees, 14 inches or less, that really works great. But the thing I don't like about it, it's just got a half-wrap bar on it, which limits it for branching. You're really much better off if you get it where you can use it from both sides. And so I spent the big bucks and got me a full wrap bar. So this should improve it a lot, because it's such a limited use saw instead of a general purpose saw that I'm used to. Putting this on, I can cut this way or flip it over and cut this way instead of having to go around the other side. So it's only held on with 4 screws. So I'll get it changed out and be right back. Okay, well, here's the bar off. And here's the new one. So here again, you can cut like this, cut like this. And it'll save me a whole lot of trouble, so that I'm cutting up tree, branches on a tree that's laying on the ground we dropped and stuff. I won't have to climb back and forth on it. Just go down, turn the saw which way I need to go. So big improvement. And just to talk a little bit about saws in general again. Like I say, this is a limited use saw. The saws I started out with are general purpose saw. And well, here's our fine McCulloch Promac Montgomery Ward's version. This is 60cc. And like I say, this is a farm home owner saw. It was never intended for the commercial market like this one was. But you know, they talk about German engineering, and this saw, I think the engineer went on vacation, and the guys at McCullough had stuff figured out. And this one has a higher cutting speed under light cutting, but the drawback on this saw is that it's really hard to pull through. It has 10.5 to 1 compression ratio, and this saw would have been a whole lot better if they would have put a decompression valve on it. In the later version of it, 034 Super, they actually did, and they raised the displacement to 61.5 cc's. But one of our recent videos, we were cutting some cookies on a stump, and this saw would actually outcut this one in a heavy cut. I was quite surprised. And then the other version of this I have is a Promax 650, same displacement, 60 cc, but it, as a factory hot rod from McCullough, had an extra finger port in the cylinder, and it also had a bigger exhaust port, and timing on it I think is more advanced, performs quite a bit better than these. Exhaust pitch is even different, but yeah, just when you work on stuff all the time, you think, well, you would think that people would figure this stuff out. Like, no compression release on this, and so what it does is it has a really cheaply built starter, and it only had one pawl on it to begin with, and I've upgraded it. It has 2 pawls in it, but it's all plastic. Now the starter on this one is plastic too, but the pawls are probably about 3 times bigger than the ones on this saw, and this saw pulls through pretty easy. The reason for that, again, engineering. Now the Promax 650, the later versions of it actually had a decompression valve on it, but the early one like I have does not. But what McCullough engineers came up with was an exhaust port that looks like this. And what happens is this opening here, as you're pulling it through, lets some of the compression out, and then when it gets up here it seals the cylinder totally, and you would think that would be detrimental to the horsepower, but isn't at all. It's amazing. So just a simple design like that would have been very simple as a casting, whereas this one they have to have a whole different cylinder and the valve and all that stuff. So much for German engineering. Some of it's really good. Like I say, I know I pick on this saw a lot, but for its intended use now, we got the full wrap and the 24-inch bar, the fast speed and the horsepower. It's going to be superb for doing, there again, light tree work, branching and limbing. So anyway, there you have it. We'll be back for part 2 of our video. Well, we're back for part 2. What we're going to talk about on part 2 is starting procedures and shutting down procedures of chainsaws. Okay, well, for our starting procedures, if you watch a lot of our videos, I usually don't go through all the stuff that I do. I just say I'll be right back, and when we're back we're running. But this saw here is real cold-blooded, and it's really cold out. Okay, well, first things first, set your throttle for the high idle, ignition switch on and choke on. Go ahead and start the saw, but your saw will tell you when it's ready to start cutting. So once you fire it up, you'll want to take the choke off, but you don't want to rev it up real fast. You just want to run it at low to medium speed. And then what you want to do is let it run for 10-15 seconds or a little longer, depending on each saw is different. Then give it throttle. And if it falls flat on its face, it kind of tries to stall, it's not warmed up enough. So let it idle and run up again, and then keep doing that until pretty soon the saw will just pick up and run great. So that means it's reached the optimal temperature. And I usually run it just a little bit longer than that just to make sure. So anyway, we'll do that. So you could see momentarily it stalled and then it started picking up the RPM right away. So this saw in a real cold weather won't do that. It'll stumble on its face for almost a half a minute. The other weird thing is if I'm out cutting, and we used a saw in a video recently, it was about 39 degrees or a little less. If I set it down on the ground for more than a minute, it would run and stumble again because it cools off so quickly. So the other thing, and then when you're done cutting, in the cold weather, I usually run the saw after I'm through cutting, just run it medium throttle, just 15-20 seconds or so, and then shut it off. Hot weather's got to be totally different. So in hot weather, once you're done cutting, I'll run the saw about a third throttle, sometimes up to a minute, and you can feel the air coming out of the saw. You can feel how the temperature is, and when it cools off pretty good, you can shut it down. And the problem with shutting a hot saw off does a couple of things. You get a heat soak, and what that does, you'll have hot spots right by the exhaust port and stuff, and two-stroke oil, when it gets in a real hot spot, flows away from the hot spot. And that's why partial synthetic or something like that works better than just straight mineral oil, because it'll stay there. And castor bean oil actually will go to a hot spot. The problem with castor bean oil based stuff is it doesn't run clean. It's really dirty. So anyway, those are what I do. So that's a good BS for everybody. I'll see you soon. Vintage is best.